Mike Leach can be a little bit of a touchy guy sometimes.
Okay, well, interesting stuff. Thought we'd throw a little other things outside of fantasy football your way, and I'm glad you had an update on those situations. Who were you rooting for, Washington or Washington State in that game?
Oh, I'm a Husky through and through. I bleed purple and gold when it comes to college football.
All right, well, very good, Ryan. Well, we appreciate you being on the program, and we'll do it again Thursday. All right, buddy?
Sounds great.
All right, have a good night, Ryan.
All right, thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Take care.
So what's your take on what he had to say?
So I wrote a note pre-show that I wanted to run by you in regards to the Seahawks, and it's just and they remind me a little bit of New England. Obviously, Russell Wilson has a different play style than Tom Brady, given the differences in age and the physicality of each quarterback. But would you agree that maybe offensively, obviously they're not going to have a guy with a 1,600-yard season receiving, but they're maybe the most complete offense in the NFL right now? I mean, just the way that Wilson is able to divvy out. Obviously, Luke Wilson doesn't get a lot of stuff, but when he's there, Wilson hits him, and we're just, guys like, Will Disley, obviously Tyler Lockett, DJ Metcalf, Chris Carson, who's coming off a 1,000-yard season. He's going to have another one again, probably be a Pro Bowler. They just have a very balanced offensive approach, and it's no secret why they're 10-2 right now, and arguably one of the three best teams in the NFL, maybe a Super Bowl contender in the NFC.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, again, it's one of those kind of things where you figure you have to see how a lot of things play out. So,
I mean, I like them a lot right now. I think Pete Carroll has done a great job, obviously, in the wake in the past couple of years. Obviously Richard Sherman's in his second year in San Francisco. Cam Chancellor had that horrible career-ending injury. And you know what? Like, when you have Russell Wilson as your quarterback and now they got him locked up for another 4 years, you're going to be in good shape. I think Carroll's done a terrific job. He's on a Hall of Fame track record. Oh, yeah. And you believe this? No, Scott, Russell Wilson is the only quarterback in NFL history to start his first 8 seasons without a losing record. That's just a trial. I mean, that's just a reflection of consistency. Obviously the relationship with your receiving core, your offensive line, everybody. Obviously, him and Pete Carroll are kind of like this at this point. They're they're the West Coast version of Brady and Belichick. If I'm for lack of a better comparison.
Well, not only that. Okay, don't kid yourself. Pete Carroll drafted him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yep.
So our next guest, just so you know, he works at the WEI Network. Associated of mine, his name is Stuart Hack, and he's a baseball guy, and I've gotten to know Stuart real well. When I worked with Peter Ween for the WEINetwork.com, Peter and I did the Sports Exchange for a period of time. Unfortunately, Peter's wife got seriously ill, and unfortunately... but yeah, Peter, he went ahead and got ill, and as a result, he right now is suffering from a stroke. So, meanwhile, Stuart will be on the line any moment, and we'll bring him on. So, with that said, okay, we'll bring him on. So.
Yeah, we're going to have some interesting topics to talk about with Stuart, but in the meantime, just for all of our listeners, and we appreciate every one of you who are on, give us, follow our social media. You can always give us a follow. It's South Florida Tribune, Tribune South on Twitter. You can follow me at Twitter at @adio_Lewis00. We post a lot of good content on there. We're trying to grow this network. We have a lot of good things in store for you, something that we'll tease at the end of this show, but we're not going to talk about until Thursday's show that we're going to talk about. But we have a lot of really good things planned. I think you would agree, Scott. We're really excited with the way that the Tribune is progressing. Obviously, we're getting a lot more viewership. We have a lot more listeners, and we're attracting a lot more writers, which is important. Again, I said this on last show before Thanksgiving. If you're interested in writing, if you have a passion for sports, maybe there's a particular region of the country that you live and you're passionate about, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us on the social media platforms that I just mentioned, and I'll mention in our handles again for Twitter. I'm at @adio_Lewis00. Scott is at Scoop33333. You can also find the South Florida Tribune at Tribune South on Twitter as well. if you want to reach us. If you're interested in writing, we're always interested in taking on new writers. We want to build a versatile profile of people from all over the country. Our name is South Florida Tribune, but one thing I think we're trying to preach here is versatility and be able to cover everything all over the country. We want to be a national brand. I think that's the thing that's most important to us. We're not trying to pigeonhole ourselves with the name South Florida Tribune. Realistically, we're trying to be all-encompassing. We want to talk about as many sports as we can. I think that's really important to growing us. I mean, I'm sure you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Oh, no question about it. Meanwhile, Stuart Hack's about to come on the line. And Stuart, you there?
I'm here.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate you being on the program, buddy. All right. Well, let's go ahead. I was telling our listeners that you do a program for Peter Ween Show, WEINetwork.com, called The Hack Attack. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing over with Peter.
I'm on Monday nights at 6. We get usually we interview either writers, sports writers, authors. We've had some former athletes on the show. Brought a guy back from the dead. That was pretty fun. And we have a good time.
Very good. All right. Well, let's talk about the Mets managerial hiring. By the way, you're on with Louis Adio Weiss. He's a baseball guy in every sense of the word.
Okay. Look forward to talking.
Nice to meet you, Stuart.
So let's talk about the Mets managerial hiring.
So they hired Carlos Beltran. Anytime you make a managerial change, usually you want somebody different than what you had. So in other words, Mickey Callaway was a first-time manager. Not too much was known about him. So when the job opened up, when they let Callaway go, the first inkling you get is they're going to look for a guy with experience, a guy that's managed before. And the two names that came up were Joe Girardi and Buck Showalter. Van Wagenen, I think, wanted his own guy, and he wanted a guy he could sort of control, and he wasn't going to be able to do that with Girardi and Showalter. So then the next thing you look for is somebody with a pedigree for the Mets. And Carlos Beltran was the one that really fit that role the best. And Beltran wanted to manage. He was the runner-up for the Yankee job that went to Aaron Boone in 2017. And Cashman was so impressed, made him a special assistant to the club. So he had the desire to manage, which I always found funny because as a player, I never thought of him as a future manager, but apparently it was something he wanted to do. Players have always loved the guy. His teammates have always loved him. So we'll see what kind of manager he makes.
What kind of a manager do you think he is going to make?
I think he'll be a good manager in the sense he can make the tough decisions. He's been around the game a long time. There'll be his biggest challenge, I think, will be dealing with the media. That wasn't something he was thrilled about doing when he was a player. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles it, especially if they lose a close game and maybe some of the writers will question something that he may have done. We'll see how he reacts to that. I think that's the one thing he's got to overcome, especially, managing in New York.
Stuart, I'll start off by saying this. I'll preface it before I get all negative Nancy on everyone, but I think Carlos Beltran is a future Hall of Famer as a player. I think his combination of power and speed and the fact that he was at one time a Gold Glove center fielder means a lot. But personally, from the standpoint of the Mets, I think you said it. Van Wagenen wanted somebody that he could control, and I think that's kind of what we saw with the relationship with Callaway in 2019. Obviously, the Mets surprised a lot of people and won 86 games, but this is now two managers in a row. And I know Van Wagenen didn't hire Callaway, but two managers in a row that have no prior experience managing. Callaway, of course, was a pitching coach beforehand, but I personally think the hiring of Beltran is terrible. And realistically, when he was with the Mets, he had signed a $100 million contract, and they went to the playoffs once, obviously 2006 when he was there, and he wound up being traded to the Giants that brought back Zach Wheeler. But I don't understand what Van Wagenen is really doing. I'm shocked that he even won 86 games in his first year as a general manager. I think merely that hire was to suffice extending Jacob deGrom. But why are you going to bring in a guy who, one, his relationship with the Mets was never what a lot of people wanted it to be, and a lot of that can be attributed to their lack of playoff success. Two, again, I just said it, he doesn't have the coaching experience. Yeah, you can attribute what he did with Houston in 2017 when he was more like a father figure, but again, I just don't really see the point in this managerial hire by them.
So if you put yourself in Van Wagenen's shoes for a second, and he's making his first hire as general manager, because as you said, Callaway was inherited. if he hires Girardi, he gets a guy that, has his own opinion about things, has a certain way about doing it, and maybe takes over and maybe throws Van Wagner kind of to the sidelines a little bit, so to speak. Same thing with Showalter. So now, if you're Brody Van Wagner, what are you looking at to hire? Does it necessarily, one name that had come up that would have been interesting was Robin Ventura, who had managerial experience with the White Sox, but, and he had the Met pedigree, but for whatever reason, and I don't know if they had talked to Ventura back when they hired Callaway, and Ventura did not want the job then. Maybe he still didn't want the job. I think it was a decent hire considering he wasn't going to get Girardi, he wasn't going to get Showalter because of the money, and B, because they would have just had their own way of doing things and he couldn't control them. So you bring in someone who was a great player, had a great career, I would say borderline Hall of Famer. I think he'll definitely make it like in a Veterans Committee at one point, depending who else he's up against at the time. I don't know if he'll get in regularly. But, he has the Met pedigree. He was a great player. I think given that they weren't getting Girardi, they weren't getting Showalter, he was probably the best one they could have gotten.
All right, so Stuart, my question is this. I interviewed Jim Riggleman during spring training, and he's a very qualified guy. Is he going to be on the staff of the Mets? I would think he should have a good experience.
No, their bench coach, they hired Hensley Mullins.
Oh, yeah?
So he was the bench coach for the Giants. He had interviewed for some managerial spots himself. He has no managerial experience, though, again, he's been a bench coach.
Okay.
So Riggleman, I don't know if he's still with the organization, but I don't believe he's on the coaching staff.
I would always think that if you're a first-time manager, you'd want to have a guy with a wealth of knowledge. And one thing I noticed last year when I covered the Mets in spring training was they had a wealth of a coaching experience in there, and headed by Riggleman, and there were other ones, but those are the ones that stand out in my mind.
One name that had come up when Beltran got hired was Terry Collins.
Oh, really?
To come back as a bench coach. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was Collins' choice. Maybe he didn't want to go back onto the field, or, the Mets decided they didn't want to go there because, you bring Collins in and, you're kind of looking over your shoulder. If something goes wrong, do you bring Terry in there to take over and clean up any sort of mess?
Well,
I don't know that much about Mullins as far as what kind of guy he is. If he'll be, if he would have made a good manager himself, I guess time will tell.
I'll throw a hypothetical at you, and it's nothing more than just a hypothetical, okay? Watching Beltran take this managerial job would be like watching Eddie Murray take the job since he didn't have the greatest relationship with the media, especially when you got to deal with this 162 games during the regular season, let alone during spring training, and if you're lucky enough to get to the postseason. Would you say that's a valid comparison?
Yeah, that's valid, and if you want to go extreme, you could say Albert Bell.
Oh God. Cork bat, no.
That's probably a little extreme. Again, he was well liked. Every place that Beltran played, every team that he played, his teammates, loved him. They went to him for advice. They saw him. He was a quiet leader. So maybe that's, maybe he comes in and he's kind of like a Gil Hodges type of guy. Maybe we kind of equated to that. Gil Hodges had a decent major league career, not quite a Hall of Famer, although a lot of people will disagree with that. And then he came in and he was like a strong, quiet guy, and he had a young team, and he was the perfect guy for the 69 Mets. Maybe Beltran is the perfect guy for the 2020 Mets or the 2021 Mets.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. In regards to who I liked the most during their playing career, Beltran was one of the most well-respected guys, especially when he was in St. Louis, too. Obviously, he played at a high level, but a lot of the rookies, like a young Alan Craig and Matt Carpenter, gravitated towards him. But again, I think when we saw with Alex Cora, when he was hired by the Red Sox to manage and they won 108 games in the World Series, he was the bench coach on a World Series team. He had previous coaching experience. I would have assumed that if the Yankees were to groom him, say, to be a manager when he was in that for an office role, they would have at least set him down to, say, winter ball to coach down there to get some experience. And I think that's important in this case, but I just don't think the Mets did enough homework on this.
I guess time will tell.
Right.
They have a lot of other issues and I think right now the manager is probably the least of their problems. They have really no closer at this point. They're going to lose one of their top starting pitchers any day now in Zach Wheeler. I think there are holes that they got to fill